Mm,
However, my parents were very loving and nurturing, and so my dad had my twin brother and me. He had us in Little League Baseball. We played for 5 years. We played Pop Warner football. He had us in the wrestling. He had us in Cub Scouts. And this Cub Scouts part of my life, if you will, was where things started to look a little different for me in terms of how I came to understand my blackness or to see my blackness. And
mm,
so to kind of flesh that out, so our Cub Scout meetings would take place about 15 minutes from where we lived. And 15 minutes away was a middle class, predominantly white neighborhood. And so I remember we would drive to those neighborhoods and it was night and day. There were manicured lawns. The streets and sidewalks were free of trash. They had newer vehicles in their driveways. Their houses were clean and smelled really good, like freshly baked cookies. I mean, it was like this utopian space that we were entering into.
mm,
And I remember, I was maybe like 9 or 10 years old, maybe 11 at the most. And I remember kind of thinking when we would come back from some of those meetings, and in my pre-adolescent brain, the way I process this contrast between how those folks lived and how we lived, and anybody who looked like me, frankly, was that it had to have meant that something was inherently wrong with me
mm,
and anyone who looked like me. If basically every white person that I saw at that time were allowed to live in those pristine neighborhoods,
mm.
while everyone who looked like myself and my family were confined, frankly, to live in very different conditions.
Yeah.
And so that, man, I just remember that starkly, and that kind of, not kind of, it did take a toll on me and how I saw myself. And I think that was kind of the basis of my lack of self esteem, lack
Mm.
of a healthy self concept, and really kind of, it almost put a ceiling on my life in terms of, am I going to be able to be more than this? Can I
Right.
possibly live in that pristine neighborhood? Could I, get a job that would allow me to drive those nice cars and things like that? And frankly, there was nothing around me that would suggest that those things were possible. And I'm
Mm.
like 9 or 10 years old, and so that was kind of the basis for where things would eventually go several years later. So I'll just continue. So
Martin, before you continue, I do want to just I got to stop there and call this out because you're 8, 9, 10 years old and you're having this existential crisis as a kid around what your potential could look like in life based on the parameters of the world around you. And I think that that's really important to note because that to me is in some ways cultural and unique to people of color who are growing up in these spaces where we look at our parents, we look at our grandparents, we want to succeed, but things around us are constantly telling us that your vision and idea of what that success could look like perhaps is unattainable for you. And to start recognizing that at such a young age when you were just nowhere even close to being fully developed is harsh. It's extremely harsh. So I feel you on that. I mean, I've actually spent some time in Portland in my 20s, and I don't think a lot of folks recognize even like how racially tense Portland, Oregon can be. I remember I was doing door-to-door sales. I'll make this story real short. I was doing door-to-door sales. I was selling credit card processing machines to small businesses. So essentially walking into salons, walking into convenience stores and selling credit card processors, the things that you swipe credit card on. My territory in Portland happened to be Lake Oswego. And for anybody who knows Lake Oswego, here I am, the 6'1", inch black dude walking around with a suit and tie and a shoulder strap bag around Lake Oswego by myself all day long. Turns out some folks ended up putting calls in on me. That I'm walking around this neighborhood that looks a lot like the neighborhoods that you had just kind of laid out. And come to find out after, the cops showed up, I left, very quickly from that neighborhood. I came to find out that Lake Oswego's nickname was Lake No-Negro. And when I heard that, I was like, Wow. And that's just always stuck in my mind. So when you start talking about your experience as an 8, 9-year-old boy being in these spaces that you know are not for you, that has a lot of impact that resonates with me because I could put myself in your shoes, even though I was there, several decades after you experienced that.